Hi, Maya. I am so excited for this conversation. First off, you literally flew in from Toronto to be here and to be within LA beyond this moment. But I'm so excited and I'm so glad that this worked out timing-wise. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was perfect timing, right?
It really was.
Universal timing.
The universe aligned. It was so meant to be.
It was meant to be.
So there's so many things that I want to say, and I can't wait to dive into the questions that I want to kind of unpack with you. But first I wanted to just level set a little bit because I realized when I first told you about, hey, so there's this thing that I'm kind of sort of doing, would love for you to be a part of it. And it's now turned into what is now Imaginal Goo. And sure, it's a podcast, but I really see it as this audio diary series that I get to share with incredible women that I look up to in my life, where we can talk about, sure, the quirks, the questions, and the courageous moments of life, but also these sticky in-between moments that I think we don't always give airtime to, that I feel have been so pivotal in my life. And I've seen it be pivotal in other people's lives in big ways. And so truly, thank you for being here and being willing to share a slice of your magic with us today to talk about what Imaginal Goo means for you and what that looks like. So I guess diving right in, what I've always loved and admired about you since I met you, which was maybe a couple years ago now, but quite frankly, I feel like I've known you for much longer, lifetimes even.
A lifetime.
Lifetime. I've always admired your tenacity and your grace in not even just confronting, but tackling head-on challenges and just no agreement. And you name it. It could be any avenue of life. I feel like I've seen you kickball change and pivot and dance your way through a lot of different things. And I think that's a superpower. I don't think many people can do that, again, with tenacity and grace. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you, what are the things that you've been dancing through lately? What are some of these in-between transitional moments that maybe you're facing right now that could be really important for our listeners to hear?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think this is the perfect timing, and thank you for that. That is honestly some of the things I've heard about myself are that I don't take no for an answer.
That's true.
So the tenacity, but it's always for the greater good, right? It's like that concept of good trouble. It's the only way.
Yes.
But this is a moment of liminal goo. It's an in-between for me. So again, divine timing, universal timing is happening right now. There's a lot of change in this season. I think a lot of us are feeling that sense of change. But I think what keeps me grounded in seasons of change, and I talk about it all the time, but I have my younger sisters. And so it's really thinking of what the next generation needs. And I think for me, that's what keeps me really focused and driven. It's not always just about me, but it's how I serve the greater good. And I think of my little sisters as I'm doing that. And so I think for a lot of us, it's really considering who are we building for? And it could be building for ourselves, building for our younger selves. I guess in some ways, the next generation feels like we're speaking to our younger selves. But for me, that's kind of what keeps me rooted, grounded, and able to survive in moments where I don't feel like I have as much control, or the path doesn't always seem so clear.
Well, first off, thank you for saying that, because as you were sharing, I was thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm a younger sister. And something that you said reminded me of we forget that everyone's still growing up. And so I guess as you're navigating this, and I think it's incredibly honorable, but also a privilege that I don't think many people remember or think about, the impact that we have on other people of other generations to come. And if there's anyone who does that, it's definitely you, in a lot of the capacities that you, both in your career, but I think just as a leader of who you are within your community, which I want to talk more about, of who you are in your family. But I guess the follow-up is, what do you think is the role of all of these different changes, hopefully for the better, for like this younger generation, what role does that play as you think about what's even next for you?
So that's a great question. And I think that's where, even for me, I'm trying to figure out where I sit within it all. Like lately, I've been thinking a lot about the value of mentorship. And I see that coming up often in my communities and all around me. Mm-hmm. And that's something I feel like I don't know if I've fully tapped into to its full potential, but it's something that's so critical. Like when we're able to give back in terms of like teaching others what we've learned, it also comes back to us, right? Like the advice that we give is advice that we need often, and it helps cement it and secure it. But I'm also seeing it around me, right? I sense it in myself sometimes where you can feel a little bit lost, but then when you're able to kind of like tap into community, share what you know, or even like reach out to someone and get that like that sense of like official mentorship, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think it helps guide your path, and it helps you feel a little bit more grounded in the direction that you're taking.
Wise words.
I hope.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's like, I think what's so beautiful, and for listeners who may not be as familiar with your story as I am, you know, you are such a force in your space, and that space being, sure, maybe tech, digital, B2B, what have you, marketing, social impact, like it's all of it. There's so many things, and folks can stalk you online when they're listening to this, because we won't go into that.
We're still in the between.
Yeah, we're still in the in-betweens, right?
That hasn't cleared yet.
All that to say, you're a leader in no matter what capacity or room that you step into. And I think something that I've grappled with myself, but even just in seeing from students or those who are also in their in-between as they try to get into their early stages of their career, it's how do you navigate what you're passionate about, what you want to be doing, but then also the realities of the world that we're facing right now. I'd be curious what a piece of advice you would give to them.
That's a really interesting one, because I think, so for me, that's something that I've always tried to figure out, because I've been torn between worlds, right? Like I have always been in the policy space, working like in government programs, nonprofits, building things like regulatory governance initiatives and things that were less aligned, I would say, to where I wanted to be, right? Like I wanted to work in fashion and beauty and work in entertainment with music and all of those pieces. And so I was torn between worlds. It was like I worked in the policy space. It was very serious, and it's still, right? Like it still is very serious, where I wanted, at some points when I was younger and like working in you know, government policy and public health and national security, I remember my friend getting a job at an ice cream shop, and that's all I wanted, was something where I could have a little bit more fun in my career and feel like it was a little bit more, not easy, but like there's just lightness and levity to it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think over time, though, like where early on in my career, I did build more of like the very like structural policy and governance and all of those different pieces. But now I've found that way to merge the worlds together, where I've still had people who were like, oh, you want to touch on celebrities? Maybe you should go find something that's more of a fit for you, without realizing like the full story, right?
Yeah.
Like you can merge different worlds together. And actually that, I think, makes you stronger if you're able to bring your different interests together to, right? Like impact storytelling. How do you reach people in the best way? Like, for example, I would love to see someone like Cardi B talking about financial literacy because she's so good at it.
Hey, I mean, we got to send her this clip of.
But it's, I think the way that we look at the world is that we should all be in very specific boxes, but we know that the superpowers are when we create bridges between worlds and when we're able to like cross-pollinate, right? Like getting that thread and pulling everything together, I think, is what makes us powerful. And I think that when we're thinking like we want to like balance out the different types of work that we want to do, I don't think we have to choose one or the other, right?
Yeah.
We can also have like diverse interests and focus areas, and we're allowed to lean into things that maybe feel a little bit more fluffy because they bring us joy, right? And that doesn't have to take away from the seriousness of the moment or the work that we do to feed into the seriousness of the moment. I think there's space for all of that in our lives.
Oh, gosh, there's so many things that you just shared that I think is just oozing with wisdom. And, it reminds me, like, I personally, obviously I'm biased, but I think every person that will be on this show are multi-passionate, multi-talented, multi-hyphenate human beings that happen to be high-performing in a lot of different capacities. I'm looking at someone who's literally that to a T. One of the threads, speaking about strings and thread, one thread that I want to pull on that you shared is our superpower is when we bring all these different intersections together. I have personally, as a friend and colleague of yours, has always loved the intersection of your personal identity with your community. That I think, as a first-generation Filipino American, I resonate deeply with. I think we've even talked about, we've probably exchanged a few stories here and there about our mothers and our families. But I'd love to know more about what role has that intersection of your identity played in the way that you show up in the world, in the way that you want to show up in the world as you're navigating this transition. And what would little Maya have to say about it?
What would little Maya have to say? So I know, I feel like we're bringing our FaceTimes to life.
Yeah, we really are. Thank goodness. It's about time.
About time. So as a Lebanese Canadian, and I was born in Beirut, we fled when I was really young. We were 2 years old. We first went to Italy, walked across the Alps to Austria, landed in Ottawa before I turned 4. So a lot of excitement before I turned 4. Right? It was war, fleeing, the whole story. I think growing up, it was hard to understand what my identity was. There was a huge gap between what I understood of being Lebanese, what my parents understood of being Lebanese, and how that came to life in Canadian society. And there weren't really a lot of Lebanese people at my school, and most of the Lebanese people I knew were my cousins. But I think as I got older, I was able to own the story and the narrative in my own way. And I think a lot of it is done through food and tapping into music and art and culture. But I mean, it still wasn't easy to be Arab, especially post 9/11 and the narrative that you're told. There wasn't really any modern Arab culture to tap into. And I would say that modern Arab culture didn't really start to emerge until a few years ago, even in a way that felt super accessible. I think about my younger sisters and the type of media that they even were taking in. And everything about the Arab or Muslim world was war and politics or religion.
Yeah.
And that's not really fully encompassing. But now there's new artists that are popping up. There's films that are super accessible. And there's all these super strong Arab voices that are starting to rise up and just be seen. Yeah. And I think that to me is a moment of magic for the global Arab diaspora. And there's a lot of different groups that are working on also supporting this rise. I think for me, oftentimes I've been the only Arab woman in a lot of these spaces that I'm in. I think especially in the public policy spaces, I didn't see a lot. And especially being from Southern Lebanon, there's also not a lot of us. But I think over time, and I think especially over the last year, I've really leaned in and understood what my role is in the community and how I can step up and help elevate the voices of other Arabs and how I can navigate the system in a different way. I think some of it was internal to some of the companies that I was in where I had more access, but now I know that I'm placed here for a reason. I have a better understanding of that gift and how I can help others find their voice in a way that because I've had to work so hard at finding mine over time.
Oh, speaking of, speaking of the work you've had to do to find your voice over time, I feel like that is something that is so unique, sure, to all of us, but a hypothesis that I think I've seen for myself, but also as I look out into the world to my friends, to people that I admire, it's kind of like the work before the work. Like the work that you've done on Maya and yourself impacts the work that you do, that you put out into the world. And I know for me, as I reflect back on my very short life that I've had so far, my definition of success has changed and evolved so much. And I'm curious for you, having done this work to claim your voice, to have something to say, and now be at this really pivotal moment, I think, of what you can create next. What has been and continues to be, I guess, your North Star in all of this moment, now that you've found this voice and this work that you've been doing for yourself and for your community?
That's an interesting question because I don't know if I found my voice yet. Like, I think I understand what it means to speak up, and I understand what it means to express myself, but do I know how I feel like this is that in-between moment, right? Like, I'm not 1,000% sure what I want to say yet. And I feel like that's an important moment. I mean, over the last 8 years, let's say, I've been within the confines of a corporation. And so a lot of my voice has been limited, or, right, you speak on behalf of the company that you work for. And so now, as I'm detaching myself from that world, I have that opportunity to say what I want to say. And there's still, and I think I'm the type of person that doesn't want to put things out into the world just because, right? Just because the internet makes it easy or anything like that. I want to know that what I'm putting out is weighted and that it's having the type of influence that I want it to towards a very specific focus. And so I'm still navigating that and trying to figure out, like, what is it that I'm going to, like, put my voice behind and really lean into. And for so long, I think I've been able to tell other people how to share their voice and to support them in sharing their voice, but I haven't quite grasped what my original story is. So that's where this is coming at an interesting point.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like being asked questions and being able to explore that and to sit down and, like, you know, reflect on some of the questions that you'd sent over. But there is that feeling of like fear. I wouldn't say it's fear. It's not fear, but there is that feeling of uncertainty still about, like, what are my key messages? Because that's the truth, right? Like, we have our public persona, and we have our, like, there's obviously so much that I would want to say, but I also want to be very intentional with that message that I'm, like, putting my full weight behind and how I'm expressing myself towards, like, whatever topic it is.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you for your authenticity in that, because it's so, and I think this is such a perfect, like, live example. We're literally doing this conversation live. There's no formal script, which is so classic, of course. There's no other way to do it. But I think you're hitting on something that's so interesting, because for me as an outsider looking in, you absolutely are someone that resonates for me as someone who has a voice, someone that's powerful, someone that already, quote unquote, has it figured out. And I think that's part of the magic of these moments, like these in-betweens, these conversations where everyone's still figuring something out. And it's in these in-between moments that I know, for me, as someone who particularly will never describe myself as a patient individual, I like to rush through the middle. Just take me to the results. Take me to the end game. But what I'm getting from you is, like, oh my gosh, I'm witnessing Maya, a friend of mine, in this in-between moment where she's cooking, she's baking, she is discovering what this is. And so thank you for being a mirror for me of, like, oh my gosh, this is such a flag for me to enjoy the process. Yeah. To enjoy that ride. Because I honestly don't ever.
I mean, yeah, we're always rushing to get somewhere.
Yes.
That was one of the themes for last year for me, was, like, enjoy the process. Because then you get to the end and you're like, wait, and then you rush to the next step, right? Instead of just, like, savoring the moments in between. And I noticed some of the people that I respect the most are the ones that do enjoy every moment, that like are able to celebrate, right? Even the small wins, or if you're on a work trip or building a project, you're actually taking the time to take photos together and go out for dinners. And right? It's those in between moments that actually end up making the end point even more special, because I always think like it's like what you put into something. If it's joy or excitement, the intentions that you're putting into whatever you're building, that's what will come out at the other side, right?
Absolutely.
And so how are you building and how are you creating?
Speaking of building and creating, I'm going to kind of do a little callback to something that you said earlier about your sisters.
Okay, let's hear it.
So I have younger sisters. I myself am a younger sister. I grew up always hearing advice, whether I asked for it or not. And I think even too, we're at a time, and I don't know anyone in my like orbit or my ecosystem who isn't constantly trying to improve themselves, and not to a fault as if there's something missing or bad or wrong, but just the evolution of like, how can I grow? I'm curious, what has been the worst piece of advice that you've ever been given? And I guess the flip side of that is, what is advice that you would welcome in this particular stage of life and transition that you're in right now?
So first of all, I want to say that the best advice often comes from teenage girls.
I believe it.
If I have a problem, I will put it in front of my sisters and their friends. And I get the best advice.
That's
because it's so raw and it's so real.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, here are the facts, and here's...
I'm going to dish it. I'm just going to tell you what it is.
Here's what it is. But I think the worst advice, I would say it's not really advice, but it's been when people have allowed me to like self-victimize a little too much, or kind of like stew in more negative spaces or emotions. I think that is where, like, that's where things start getting blocked. Like, obviously there's moments of injustice that happen and you need to vent and get things out. But I think it's allowing yourself to sit in that for a little too long. And I think it's important to look and recognize when that is happening and how it's happening, because I think that can drive you off of your own internal compass too. And I think, like, on the flip side, it's also advice that feels a little bit too forced. And that's where I think you have to have such a strong core, or like a sense of vision for where you're going. Because I think one of the things that I know I do well is I can take in a lot, like if I'm building a project, I know how to take in a lot of feedback from different areas of the business, for example, areas that don't usually work together, and like thread it together to build something. But sometimes you can get stuck in a feedback loop where you're just getting too much information. I think there's a moment where you have to know and trust yourself that you've taken in enough, and just like kind of pull the plug and move forward. And I think it's the same thing with advice, right? It's good, obviously, to get diverse perspectives, but I think you need to also have a really strong vision and to know where you're going. And I think if you're someone that doesn't feel like you have such a strong sense of self-identity, like a core belief in knowing where you're going, then sometimes too much external inputs can be detrimental. I think that's something that I always have to keep in mind, because I do. I mean, I do get driven by other people's, right? Like, it's just
human nature. Yeah.
Human nature.
Totally.
But I think in this moment, the advice that I would welcome, I think it's recognizing where my gaps are. I think if you understand where your gaps are and you go to someone for expert advice, like they're an expert in this specific space, let's say building a business. So if it's someone else that has area, like an expertise in an area that I don't know very well, then I'll listen. And that's me seeking out guidance from experts. I think that's the type of expertise that I'd be looking for, rather than anyone commenting on like my personal life or my personal path and where I'm going.
I love hearing you say this, because this is something that I've been noticing already throughout this series. Like, and in hindsight, I'm just recognizing, like, oh my gosh, this is like the best version of selfishly being able to sit down and having an hour masterclass with all these incredible women that I get to like look up to and learn from. But a common thread, and I think you're hitting it on the head, is like you reach a point, I would like to think, in life throughout different moments of your life where you're learning more and more about yourself. And what I heard in what you're just sharing is you have that grounded sense of who is Maya, who you are, what you stand for, what you believe in. And as you grow and evolve, the advice that you welcome into your life isn't around the things that are fundamental to you, but they're all around what you're creating next. And I think that's so special. As someone who it wasn't that very long ago, I don't know if I could confidently say that I really knew who I was, let alone a personal compass or what I stood for. I think that was definitely the evolution of my 20s, for sure. And then something kind of clicked, failing a lot, failed forward, a lot of different humbling moments in life. I guess curiosity is, what helped you arrive at this version of Maya where you are able to say, no comment is needed for that?
That's a good question. I think what helped me get here is realizing how many moments I didn't trust myself and asked someone else for advice and trusted their opinion over my own. Like even something as small as like asking my friend what color bag was nicer or like what art print was nicer. And years later being like, but I didn't even like that color, right? Like I chose the wrong one. And like, why did I need someone else's advice for that? Which sounds very, right? Like it
Totally.
very superficial, but it's true. And I think a lot of us can get led down that path, especially when we're younger and we're seeking validation through others. But I think that's a perfect example, right? Like I asked someone else for advice on the color of the bag and like an art piece and chose their version over mine. And so years later, those are standing there as symbols for me of like, what does it mean to trust my own internal compass and to like actually just respect that I had a choice that I knew, but I needed to ask that, right? Like I needed to ask just to double check, but it wasn't actually the right answer.
I love that you mentioned that because it's to your point. It could be something as quote unquote simple as picking out a color of bag to, should I stay in this job or should I not?
Right.
Should I ask for this raise or should I not?
Yeah.
Is this the person that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with? Like, and I mean, I'm naming all these things that I feel like so many of my friend group, myself personally, have been asking myself. And I don't know, I think in hearing what you're sharing, it reminds me there's this quote of, we're drowning in data, but we're starving for wisdom. And as I'm hearing you sharing about these pieces of your life, I can't help but think, my gosh, like there's no better wisdom than the one that comes from within. No one will know Maya better than herself. No one's going to know me better than myself, for better or for worse, maybe. And I guess one last follow-up to what you're sharing is, you mentioned like trusting yourself. How do you trust yourself?
How do I trust myself? It's an ongoing process. But I want to just, on that point of like, we're drowning in data and lacking wisdom, I think one of the pieces for me, and like I think it fits into all of these different questions that we're asking ourselves. I like to look at the people that, and this goes back to expertise, right? I like to look at people who are doing things that I really respect and asking them how they do it for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like looking for examples, that's wisdom. And so rather than selfishly putting my problem on the table, being like, how should I handle this? It's a little bit more like, I really appreciate how you do this specific thing. Can you tell me what your approach is and why, right? Because then I can take that information and choose to apply it to my life or not. And it's not necessarily someone telling me how to, right? Telling me how to do a specific thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that approach helps a little bit more because also then you're getting to know people and like what their values are and what their approaches to living their life.
Absolutely.
Like.
And I love how when you share that, it reminds me of like another hard lesson I personally have had to learn is like learning to receive help, learning to ask for help.
I don't know how to do
Yeah. You're like, no, I wouldn't know.
I have no idea.
No, but I think everything that you're speaking to is so, I don't think that it's something that will just be specific to this year that we're living in, right? I don't think it's just specific to these in-between moments that we're navigating constantly. And so I guess pivoting a little bit, but close to what you were just sharing is, what do you think is something about the life that you are living now, right? Like all of these things, the advice that you've taken on, the wisdom that you've created for yourself. What about your life now would be hard to believe if I were sitting and talking to younger Maya?
I think so much of what I've done, and even like diverting off the path that was expected, that I think would be a little shocking. Just like stepping outside of what my community expected, for example.
Yeah.
And just deciding to do it my way. I think that would have been hard to believe.
I love that that's again, like the mirror of the conversations, because to me, I'm like, I don't know any other Maya other than a trailblazer.
I mean, I don't think you would have recognized me 15 years ago to now. Because back then, I think I was a little bit more like trapped in my community's expectations.
Yeah.
And then I just broke free.
What helped you break free?
It was something really unexpected that happened to me that I just did not expect to have, like without getting too deep in the details. But I think it was something that kind of just like slapped me in the face that was so far outside of what I expected to have happen, where suddenly I realized that I was like, wait, everything I've been taught is maybe not the exact truth. And I actually have control over my life and can choose what direction it goes in.
Sounds like there's like a moment of self-agency.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's constantly elusive.
It's always when something traumatic happens and you're like, oh, wait, nothing I've been taught is the truth.
No.
I get to choose.
Oh, gosh. And talk about like a quintessential, like again, if in the spirit of imaginal goo, right, it's literally about the process of when a caterpillar transforms, like it sheds itself in this cocoon to become this butterfly. And what that process can feel like isn't exactly the most comfortable, but it's a traumatic experience.
Yeah, it's very mushy.
Yeah. It's mushy, it sounds uncomfortable, it sounds like gooey, it sounds like it's not, and here we are, and yet here we are, this is our reality. Oh my gosh, well, I have some last rapid questions, but I guess before I go into them, is there anything else that you wanted to say or share that we haven't already talked about?
On the piece of asking for help though, because I think all of us need to think about like giving and receiving, right? There's this quote that keeps coming up, and I don't know the quote exactly, but it's just the concept of like, how much do you love to be able to give and help others? And why would you take that joy away from someone else? And when I read that somewhere, I was like, oh, because I do, like, I love to be able to support others, help others do. So why would you take that joy away from someone else?
That's so beautiful. And like, what a perspective shift, right? Like, I think when I think about help or advice, I make it about me, where the knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, well, if you're helping, it must mean because I'm weak.
Yeah.
Or it must mean because you think I'm not capable, versus no, like, what if I'm worthy of receiving? What if it's just simply because they have joy of giving support? Like,
and it's strength. It actually like makes relationships stronger too.
It really does.
And so it's actually our duty to accept help.
Whoa, okay.
Like another episode to reframe it.
Our duty.
It's our duty to accept help.
Yeah.
Or to ask for it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you're giving me a lot to think about.
I know. I'm thinking.
Yeah, literally. Like, I'm going to ruminate on that a bit more.
Rapid fire.
I know. We're going to go into rapid fire questions. No pressure.
Rapid fire.
You see, I can't speak fast.
I can speak fast.
This is perfect. Okay. So just to level set really quickly. So these are going to be 5 rapid fire questions. The whole intention is for you to share immediately what comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answers. This is a safe space. Safe space, brave space. Okay, so I'm gonna share it, and then I'm gonna say blank. You can kind of share what comes top of mind. Okay, I'm so proud of myself for blank.
For jumping when it's scary.
I forgive myself for.
I forgive myself for not always choosing myself.
Dear younger self.
Keep writing.
Dear future self.
How's the global empire?
Have to check back on that one, that's for sure. I'll have to do a callback. Okay, last but not least, what is one thing that you, as Maya today, know to be capital T true?
That people are inherently good and that I can always figure it out.
There's that self-confidence and assurance, which I think, again, has been a really cool theme that's been popping up. I love that that's something that you know to be true for yourself. Oh my gosh, Maya, I'm at a loss for words. There's so many things that I'm looking forward to, hopefully for the next conversation that we have. Part two.
Excited
to continue it on. But truly just thank you so much. Again, just not only for being here and sharing your wisdom, a slice of your own life and your journey, but for being this even outside of these walls, because I know that the world needs it. I know your community back home, but also your immediate community. I know you've shared so much about the power and inspiration you draw from being a Lebanese woman and what that means and looks like. And as a friend and as a colleague, just thank you for your courage and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to see you go on this journey and to share everything that you know, everything that we've had on our FaceTimes throughout the last year.
Yes.
For the world to see that. So thank you for bringing me along on this journey too.
I can't wait for the adventure. And what's next?
Cannot wait.
Well, for everyone who's tuning in, whether you're online or listening, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in for this episode. That's it for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.